I feel obligated to acknowledge that, as you may have noticed, this was the very dark area of Studio Arte during the dinner drinks hour, and that's the very well lit area. We blew some lights earlier this afternoon prepping for tonight. So we've set up a different little situation that I think is going to work just fine. And in the spirit of powering through, this will not be an obstacle or challenge that gets in our way tonight. We've figured out a way around it. So just want to acknowledge our intimate light setup that we have for powering through tonight. I've been thinking about this all day and I wasn't sure how I wanted to address this, but as a lot of us know, Matt Stinger, a very beloved young adult in our community, passed away in August. He meant a lot to this part of the community, in this New York City community. He was one of my closest friends in the hemophilia world. He is who pulled me into this community specifically from a greater camp community of people that are facing different chronic challenges, but he's the one who said there's actually a specific bleeding disorders community that you should be a part of. And when I wanted to do work like this to honor the memory of my brother and create programming and events that were meaningful and particularly for young people, Matt, who was one of my brother's counselors for many years, was the one who started to help me. There's two people that I always have to say thank you to for helping me figure out how to make that happen. One of them is Linda Mugford, who's here, and the other is Matt Stinger. And I can't help but recognize his absence tonight. So just feel the need to recognize that and say, I miss you, Matt, wherever you are. I'm sure many of us do. And I'm thinking about him tonight as we do this. Tyshawn, give us a little bit of an overview. Where are you from originally, and what kind of role did hemophilia play in your upbringing?
Growing up with hemophilia has definitely been a challenge to me, but it's also been something that I've considered as a blessing. So many opportunities I came across while being in the community and meeting so many great people. So I kind of like honed my condition and let it be something that accelerates my mentality or my motivation.
What kind of role did going to a camp that had kids that not just that had hemophilia, but all kinds of different chronic disorders represented there, how did that influence your development as a young person and a young person with hemophilia?
Camp is where it all started at for me. It's pretty much the foundation of who I am. Camp is always that utopia for me. I can go away and meet so many amazing different people, and who you physically were didn't matter. It was all about who you were in here.
How has the role of, what has invincibility, talk a bit about that. What does that word mean to you, and how has that influenced the way you think about your care and management?
In my opinion, invincible is being prepared. With this condition, once I'm factored up and I have my medicine, I feel invincible. I feel like I can go jump off a cliff or get hit by a car.
I wouldn't recommend, no, don't do either of those actually. You had mentioned earlier the opportunities that you've had, and I have felt that way too for a multitude of reasons, not the least of which is getting to go to a camp and making friends. But you were also referencing how you got opportunities for internships, and you got opportunities to learn from some of the companies that work within our community.
Starting with this internship that I received from Bayer about 2 years ago, which was awesome. I got hands-on experience, what it would be like to work with a pharmaceutical on a product. I was lucky enough to keep my learnings going with the Hemophilia Association in New York, and I was able to get an aspect from like the nonprofit side and see how things work there, and now I'm a board member. It's amazing how much I've learned within the past 5 years just by doing those things, like interning and just exposing myself as much. So it's definitely been a big part of it.
And you know what I hear in that too is you keep following the thread, right? That you have the one opportunity, you take that, you learn, you meet people, you gain new skills. Another opportunity presents itself. You take that, you meet more people, you gain more skills. Another opportunity, and before you know it, you're in your mid-20s, you have a resume, you have a skill portfolio, and you now have an opportunity to look around the world and say, well, where else can I apply these skills? This is a little awkward because your executive director's right over there, but I'm gonna ask you, and we'll see how honest you're able to be with me.
Be 100%
What's the
honest.
experience been like being a board member? Because I know there's always a push throughout the whole 50 states to have not just new board members come into boards every few years to refresh them, but younger board members.
So I'm still on the onboarding side of it. I've only attended one meeting so far, but
How'd it go? How was the meeting?
it was great.
Yeah? Give us the script. What can we expect? Give us the insights.
Some top secret info. I don't know if I could, you guys are recording, so.
That's a good point. I did mention that. Okay. I wanted to ask you too, you had mentioned to me, and I thought this was really kind of like you changed my perspective on something when we were talking about compliance. because that's a huge challenge, especially again for young adults transitioning from pediatric care to adult care. How do you keep people compliant to their regimens? And you had made the point that you're not having a specific approach to self-care is actually what you think has enabled you to manage your hemophilia so well. Can you extrapolate a little bit on that? Because it was an interesting insight that you provided.
It was a point in time where I wasn't as complacent with taking my factor, and those times when I actually got hurt and it wasn't available to me and I wasn't able to infuse, I paid the price. And I take it as the days go. So if I infuse Monday, Wednesday, Friday, which is my normal routine, I'm going to Six Flags Saturday, I'll infuse again. And if I'm gonna play basketball that Sunday, I'll infuse again. I have no shame in being extra prepared. So I follow my regimen, but I just do it as activities come by.
And the proof is in the pudding, because as you've shared, you haven't had extravagant bleeds or ongoing bleeds, hospitalizations. You haven't experienced those things.
Something that's been foreign to me for the past couple of years. So.
And that's as a result of that elevated sense of self-care and being very smart about if you're going to push yourself additionally, you're going to infuse additionally. Yeah. You did mention to me that you had a minor surgery done to correct a deviated septum, and I'm curious because that's something that any kind of surgery, any kind of procedure is just something that always gets me a little like, oh boy, because you're inviting trouble in a way, right? So what was that process like for you?
Honestly, I wasn't too nervous about it, and it wasn't because of my hemophilia or anything. I just wanted to get it over with because I have horrible sinuses. I just wanted to breathe normal.
That's fair. That's a very fair thing to want.
Very little bleeding, surprisingly, too. So we were very prepared, and I felt good about that.
Not to make it a sour thing, but again, just talking about Matt, and that's somebody that we were both close to and knew well. It shook me to find out about not just a friend, but it's a young adult with hemophilia. I'm just curious to know when you heard that news, what did that do to you, and has that shifted at all the way you think about your life as someone with hemophilia? Yeah,
definitely. Matt is was a very close friend of me. We started together at Double H, and just like how Pat mentioned in the beginning, he's one of the reasons why I seen the bigger community outside of just being at camp. The power of social media these days, I seen him on Facebook, and I was, oh my God, my favorite counselor.
Your second favorite counselor.
Second favorite counselor. When I heard the news, it was very upsetting. It took me a while to believe it, and when I think about hemophilia, he's one of the faces that I think about. Being able to have him as a counselor and then become my personal friend was a big eye-opener for me too. It let me know that, this community is awesome. So many genuine people are there just to help.
Well, I like what you said about how, because it's true, he was one of those guys who kind of opened the world for me, for you, for a lot of people. That was his personality. And sort of the way that I make my brother's death useful and the death of people close to me useful is that when that torch falls, we got to just pick it up and keep going. So it's now up to people like you and I to keep doing the kind of stuff that Matt would do and inspire other people, because we ain't going to be here forever either.
True.
He is a highly accomplished film and theater producer. Please welcome up here Michael Alden. Most people, they hear the word producer, and I don't think they know a lot about what that actually means. So educate us on what you do first. What is a producer? What do you do?
A producer does a similar job to a mother planning a wedding, is the best way to say it. You have to decide what they're wearing, where they're gonna sit, how it's gonna be set up, what they're eating, making sure all the food gets on the table hot, and that everybody in the room is happy, and if there's somebody fighting, you split them up as early as possible. So from finding the product to raising the money to developing the art of it to making sure that the audience is happy is a producer's job.
And as you've said, one of the things that a producer has to do is talk about the project.
I'm asked often, how do you raise money for a property? How do you get that property to the next step? And I've always said from the beginning, from the time I was really right at the beginning of my career, you already know the people you need to have help you. And the way that you find that out is by talking about what you need or what you want all the time.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to the beginning. How did you wind up getting into producing? Because you didn't first enter the entertainment business with aspirations to be a producer, correct?
No, I wanted to be an actor. I was definitely Dick Van Dyke in the making. I was raised at a time in Southern California where it wasn't unusual to be in nursery school and have two men in gray suits come in with hats on and cameras and tell the kindergarten teacher or the preschool teacher that they wanted to take pictures of the little boys and little girls. And then you'd get a postcard in the mail, your parents would get a postcard saying, well, we think your son or daughter has star talent. And my parents got that little postcard from my nursery school. So they took me back to Metromedia, and I got there and they said, do you know who Lassie is? And I said, yes. And they said, would you like to be in a TV show with Lassie? And I said, well, yes. They put me in the cart, they took me out to what was a soundstage on a studio lot, and they opened up the gate, and there was the farm. I buy this, and I do everything they tell me to do, and then the trainer comes with the dog, and no one ever asked me, or my mother, or my father, if I had ever seen a dog live. And they brought this collie in who on television was 2 inches high, and that dog barked, and I screamed, and that was the end of my TV career. And somebody asked me if I wanted to do an inventory job at a studio where I would be inventorying post-production equipment, editorial equipment. And that led me to a relationship where I was allowed to be in the editing room with directors who eventually I created partnerships with and would start to co-produce, associate produce, and finally produce their later works.
Did you have moments in the editing room realizing, wow, there's a lot of other areas of entertainment where you have creative input? It doesn't, not just acting, there's a lot of areas where you can be a creative.
Yeah, absolutely. And specifically, by seeing in the editorial room what all those other people did wrong. I mean, that was to actually see gaping holes in coverage, in missing an opportunity to get a reaction shot, things that you can't make up. And there's a very famous line, they say, don't worry, we'll fix it in editing. And so, yes, it teaches you a lot, and it teaches you to be very patient and to think way ahead as far as how you're gonna get through something. So that's how I got the opportunity of producing, and then I moved to New York 25 years ago and walked into a room this size and saw a piece of theater and went, that's got to be in a bigger room.
Was this that comment that...
No, it's called The Last Session, and at the intermission, I was turning to the guy who brought me. I said, this has got to be in a bigger theater, and there was a tap on my shoulder, and the guy behind me said, I can make that happen. I said, how can you make it happen? He said, well, I'm the author. So I went back to the studio where I was doing post-production work, and I went from room to room to room to all the people I know that had never done theater and said, you have to give me $8,500 each. We have to make this play about AIDS. And each person gave me $8,500, and I walked in 3 days later with the money. It never happened again that way. But I felt pretty sure of myself in the moment.
Tell us a little bit about what that show was and the timeliness of it.
The brief story is, and this is a true story, of a musician who had retired or fallen from sight from the music world because he was HIV positive and had AIDS. We were doing this play because the author, who was the musician who came back to record, who was the man who had considered suicide, was told that he had 4 to 6 months to live. And during the process of making this play, his lottery number was picked for the protease inhibitors, and he turned 65 last week.
Woof! That's a good story. Good for him. So when I asked you about significant obstacles and challenges in your life as a producer, I think you took all of maybe a quarter of a second before you said 2008.
You know, in 2008, during the financial crisis, the posse of investors, the people that I know, the people that I knew, pretty much all were involved in one way or another with Bernie Madoff or associates thereof. So basically, they lost everything, which meant that eventually, if I wasn't doing a show, I was going to lose everything. And I went from being an MGM studio executive who had been nominated for an Academy Award, who'd been to the Tonys with my dad, and feeling like I'd find a settled place, to going through 2 years where my phone didn't ring. And I was doing my laundry in my bathtub.
So the reason that we know each other is through My Beautiful Stutter, which is a project that you've been working on that Ryan from Believe has been directing for the last number of years on this community of kids who stutter and attend this camp. Can you take us through how you got involved with the stuttering community through the King's Speech, and then what kind of captivated you to a point where now you're producing, and I will say the rough cut looks really good, an excellent documentary about this particularly fascinating man who runs this incredible camp for these wonderful kids?
Well, I did the King's Speech, the play that the movie was based on. I did the play in London, and coming back here, and actually hopefully next season it'll be on Broadway. As I was contacted by the Stuttering Association for the Young, Taro Alexander, their director, asking if I would assist in getting our author, David Seidler, to agree to be honored at their annual gala, their fundraiser, along with Carly Simon. And I talked to David, and he was honored to do it, and so we attended, and we had, I think, an 8-year-old young man come out at the beginning of the gala And I realized in that moment that all of the interaction with us in the audience was going to be with members of SAY from 8 to 19 years old, introducing Paul Rudd and you know, other, Helen Mirren and Carly Simon. And this little boy took a good amount of time to be able to tell us his name and why we were there. And I realized that I knew absolutely nothing about what it was like to be a person on the planet that stuttered. I knew about Porky Pig. I knew about Jim Neighbors. I knew about the fact that you could always get a good butt joke in there, you know, but when you interrupted somebody, I don't think I ever purposely intimidated or interrupted anybody, but I didn't understand what it felt like to be a person in the room that could not say how they felt. I mean, there's a cut with Katie Couric from the news who saw a piece on a teacher who asked the student in college to write his questions down in advance so that he didn't hold up the class. And I mean, that just sucker punched me. The movie's about traveling from bullying to bravery and how they got there and how who they are and how they are is normal. It's just part of who they are. It's not something to get over, it's not something to get through, it's something to incorporate and then move on, because there's bigger things for them to do.
When I saw the first rough cut of it, within the first 5 minutes, I think, was in a tremendous amount of tears, and it was in large part because what we were talking about earlier. There's actually a kid who in that doc at one point says it's a week-long camp, or I think, is it a week or 2 weeks?
Yeah, it's 2 weeks.
And it's the last night of the camp, and he's saying, you know, everyone's talking about tomorrow we go home. Tomorrow we don't go home. Tomorrow I go back to wherever he's from. He's like, and in a year from now, I come back home here. And I always felt that way at camp because it was one place where my difference wasn't a difference. It didn't separate me in any way. It was a place of difference. It was a place of adapt and improvise. There was no normal at camp. So camp always felt like home. So the whole time, and I think that's a good thing for the doc, as not a person who stutters, but as a person who just understands what it feels like to feel different and appreciates an environment as a kid where that wasn't the case, I could completely understand those kids' passion and their tears and that particular statement from that kid about, this is my home, Say is my home.
I brought a woman that did what was called bucket collecting in London. So when we did the show, she worked for the Stuttering Association there. And she wanted to raise money through the King's Speech because she had seen the movie. And it really meant a lot to her. And she was 50 years old and had never spoken outside the house, ever. And the Stammering Association, British Stammering Association, said she could raise money if she would introduce herself to me. And I did a talk back, so people could ask questions about the real Lionel Logue. And at the end, I said, is there anybody else that wants to ask a question, because the union's gonna kick us out? And it's a 1,000-seat theater, so way in the back, there's this arm like this, and it was Amanda. I have to stop because I was crying. And she stood up in front of 300 or 400 people and thanked each one of us up there for representing an opportunity for her to have a normal life. And so Ryan and I flew her over here to meet the kids from the Stuttering Association for the Young when we started this documentary. And she gave a master class. And afterwards, some of the kids came over. She's from London, remember, and said, she talked weird.
It's all relative, right? When we were talking in prep for this, you had mentioned about the Public Enemy documentary that you're also now working on. And what is it that you said? No one has the right to lose their right to try. Can you talk about what that project is and how that particular sentiment is appropriate for it?
Well, I got a phone call from an associate of mine that I'm actually doing a horror movie with, and he said, the guys that make up the rap group Public Enemy want to talk to you about making a documentary. And I was like, and they came in and they talked about living in a community here called Roosevelt, Long Island. And they lived within a 1 square mile. If you lived in that neighborhood, you were everybody's best friend. Everyone was included. Everyone went to the same school. Everyone was going to go to college. Everybody went to the community center. And that community center offered vocational opportunities. And these kids in the late 60s wanted to learn how to be DJs because they could make money at parties and they could rent halls. Meanwhile, outside of that community, we had a president who thought drugs in small communities like that would be great because it would either kill them or incarcerate them. We had television, news, and media depicting black people with hoodies as dangerous. We had government that was trying to divide rather than to include. Our guys are already off to college, and by the time Ronald Reagan was elected and trickle-down economics affected their community, the community center shut down. And they were angry and using the foul language and being really cool, and they went public, and their sentiment was, everyone has the right to try. Everyone has the right to achieve. And if you take that right away, eventually they will come and take it back. And so I said to them, if that's the movie you want to make, if I'm making the movie from Roosevelt to Reagan, which is what it's called, I will do that movie as long as you're okay with the fact that I was listening to Karen Carpenter. And Keith, the producer, said, I love Karen Carpenter.
It works out. Our final panelist who's coming up, she's a board member at NYCHC and a community mom. It's Wendy Chou. You're extraordinarily active within the community, but just to open up, could you share with us a little bit about like what your life is like outside of the bleeding disorders community?
There's life outside of the bleeding disorders community?
It's a rumor that I've heard.
I spend a lot of time in the bleeding disorders community. I don't know how you want to define outside of the bleeding disorders community, because of course I have 3 children. I do have a job. I own 2 companies. One is focused on consulting in the marketing space. The news I think that Patrick was talking about is that I am recently engaged. And my fiance Charles is sitting over there too. And he likes to keep me busy doing all sorts of cool, new, interesting things.
So you mentioned just having 2 kids go off to college. We talked a little earlier about that transition from pediatric to adult care, from being at home to being independent. How has that, I know it's only October, but how has that transition been for you?
The one piece of advice that stood out to me, someone shared this with me a few months ago, is when your kid is living at home, you are effectively their boss, right? Like they're living in your house, under your rules. You're pretty much, I know the other kids up here will probably argue with me, but you are really their boss. You control most of what they do, right? Zach's shaking his head.
Yeah, he's not buying that at all. He's like, I don't know, that's not our household.
And then when they move away and they go to college, they fire you. And you become their consultant, and I'm like, okay, that's an interesting perspective. And I'm still trying to figure this role out. I'm a consultant, so of course, I know how to consult.
Right, exactly.
But I think there's a lot of shifting and there's a lot of emotions. I don't think I've felt so happy, sad, angry, afraid, excited, anxious, all at once at any point in my life. So it's very interesting. And just for people who don't know, my daughter has severe hemophilia. And one of my daughters who went away, the other is a carrier. There was a lot to do in terms of logistics and planning, and your child that has a chronic medical condition is going, whatever, 2,000 miles away from you. I don't know if that's the distance to Indiana, but it's like
it may as well be, right?
Yeah,
like, that's how it feels.
She's going like 10,000 miles away from me, and I don't have direct access to her all the time. And so, you mentioned about the AIDS crisis and that we lost a lot of our previous generation. I don't think as a community that we've really dealt with seeing the number of kids that we're seeing grow older and all go to college. We don't have the proper processes in place to really deal with that transition as a community. So that's one of the things that I didn't anticipate. I saw it coming, but I thought I'd have more support. I didn't end up having the support I needed. And then I will say that, when I went to other areas of the country and, started looking at what other HTCs were doing, what other chapters were doing, those processes do exist in certain places. And so I do think that there's models to emulate. But we need to do more sharing and more just sort of like standardizing of these processes.
Yeah, and I think part of it is like first accepting the premise that you laid out, which is correct, is that we just have not seen a healthy generation, because before the AIDS crisis, life expectancy just wasn't as long as it is now. That's the reality of the condition. So we've just never had so many young people becoming young adults. We have to kind of catch up to ourselves a little bit. You are the board president now at NYCHC, and I know this year there was a 3-year strategic plan in part to meet some of the challenges or the needs within the greater New York community, the NYCHC community. Can you speak a little bit about what some of those challenges or needs are and what you guys are doing to meet them?
The 3-year strategic plan has been in place for a couple of years. We're actually on the very last year of our first 3-year strategic plan. One area, that we continue to focus on that's super important to us because we are a young organization is building the strength of our organization, right? Building that infrastructure. We want the organization to continue to exist and to be sustainable. So if anyone wants to volunteer for an organization and has some extra time, we're always looking for people. Another thing is continuing to do the things that we do, that we've done well, right? One of the things is our walk. We have the best fundraising walk nationwide. We were the very first walk, and we continue to be the most successful walk nationwide. We want to continue to do our gala well, which is in 3 weeks. And Education Day, our annual meeting. We are an organization that was formed around meeting the needs of the community. So we want to continue to do that, continue to do the things we're doing well now, and then move on to do new things. Inhibitors, it's not so much the numbers. It's really not just the amount. It's definitely not the amount of people because it affects maybe 30% of the population, but it's the high needs aspect of it. So, and then the last is youth. And so we want to figure out a way to really continue to engage better, I would say, the youth, young adults, teens from young adults, and then also parents, caregivers.
And I think it's useful to just kind of go through how, as an organization, you address needs. So it's nice to actually hear, no, we've listed these 4 things. We have a 3-year plan. There's specific objectives and action items attached to meeting each need. I'd want to touch on international needs. 75% of the world does not have access to sustainable therapies. So people like Tyshawn and I would be lucky to be alive at our ages around the world because half of the population around the world dies before age 10. The story that I'd love for you to share with everybody is surrounding the Save One Life Gala and the family that you hosted for the week leading up to it. Can you tell us a little bit about that and the unusual connection that made it all the more kind of close to home?
Save One Life, just as background, is a nonprofit organization started by Lori Kelly. She encourages people to sponsor children in developing countries, mostly like India, Romania, the Philippines. Save One Life had their gala recently in New York City a couple weeks ago. And when they were planning for it, their executive director reached out to me and said, do you know of any families in New York City that would be willing to host one of our beneficiaries? So we were like, okay, well, I was like, okay, Khalik later on was like, what? What did you say we were gonna do? But, we have this extra room now, right? Because the girls are gone, they're in college. So we said yes, and they ended up getting their visa. And when Mihai and his mom came, the surprise was that he looked almost exactly like a Romanian version of Khalik. We were like, what? Same build, same height, same body frame, same glasses, same look, just lighter hair. And we were like,
spooky.
Yeah, and his mom, it was hilarious because when his mom met Khalik, she goes, oh, not one son, 2 sons. She was like, oh my God. And, we talk about this statistic, right, of, 75% of people around the world don't have access, and you know it, and, and you can see people that you're sponsoring, on the website. But to actually get to meet someone, that's been personally impacted, that is healthy, that's living a good life, that's able to be a concert pianist. Mihai is like a national, international concert pianist, and he's able to do all this because he has access to Factor. The amount of factor he had access to was like a quarter of what our kids or you would take to, treat a bleed. He doesn't do it prophylaxis, no way, and it's like illegal to have factor in your home. So they were like smuggling factor around so that they could treat their own bleeds. Just the fact that Khalik and Mihai looked so similar, we talked about this, was like, wow, okay, it was the luck of the draw that we were born, that we live here, that we have access. So, as a chapter, this is definitely a big initiative for us. So global, international, that whole outlook, that's going to be very important for us.
I mean, it's the greatest need in our community worldwide is finding those around the world who don't have access and trying to provide them with it, and then finding more of those people around the world, because just diagnosis is so low, because in so many places nothing can be done. So the diagnostic practices aren't put in place, because why diagnose if you can't do anything about it?
We have an obligation to make sure that our kids are global citizens, right? I mean, our kids are going to be the one that are doing, what they feel is right. And so I think to really instill that sense of obligation and that sort of global perspective is our duty as community members.
And in particular, community in this city, this cosmopolitan city. That's a very good point. Thank you all for your attention. Thank you to these fantastic panelists for their participation.
To watch video from any of our previous Powering Through sessions, visit poweringthrough.org, or to learn more about National Cornerstone Healthcare Services, NCHS, visit nchswecare.com.